Okay, thank you for joining the Montana Book Festival for this virtual event. My name is Lauren Korn. I am the festival director this year. Today, we're here with author Anne Enright and University of Montana professors Dr. Erin Costello Wecker and Katie Kane. They will be reading and discussing Anne's newest novel, Actress. I'm going to be introducing Erin and Katie, and Erin will then introduce Anne to begin this event. Dr. Erin Costello Wecker is an associate professor of English and the director of composition at the University of Montana, where she teaches courses in composition and rhetoric and is an affiliated faculty member in the Irish Studies program and the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program. She earned an MA in Irish Studies at Boston College and a PhD in rhetoric and composition at the University of New Hampshire. Professor Wecker's research focuses on the interdisciplinary nexus between the fields of rhetoric, Irish studies, and women's gender and sexuality studies. Her work has been published in Women's Studies, an interdisciplinary journal, Studi Irlandesi, a journal of Irish studies, Teaching English in the Two-Year College, and several edited collections, including Ireland, Irish America and Work, Misogyny in American Culture, Causes, Trends, Solutions, and Learning and Teaching Writing Online, Strategies for Success. From North Dakota, Katie Kane is a writer and professor of cultural studies, English literature, and colonial studies at the University of Montana. She is the past director and co-founder of the university's Irish Studies program. Kane has published critical work or fiction in journals such as Cultural Studies, Critical Inquiry, and Black Warrior Review. Additionally, Kane is completing a short story collection titled North Dakota. One short story from this collection, Payday Loan, has come out, and a second, Roadkill, was just published in Salvage, a quarterly of revolutionary arts and letters. A third, Empire Builder, was read in July for the MT plus NYC Collective. Kane has an article on the Alberta tar sands and the work of Salish artist Corwin Claremont that will appear in American Indian Quarterly. She is currently at work on a monograph titled Big Oil in the Deep North, and she was the arts and culture editor of Laville, I'm sorry, I slaughtered that, Life, Love, and Death in Port-au-Prince, a volume of testimonials on life in Haiti for the McSweeney's series, Voices of Witness. Welcome, Anne, Erin, and Katie.
Thanks, Lauren. I really appreciate the invitation to be part of this panel. So I'd like to begin by offering my sincere gratitude to the Montana Book Festival for bringing us together for this event. As Kairos would have it, reading and writing have buoyed so many of us through this unprecedented time of chaos, anguish, and isolation. The delicate act of thumbing from page to page fosters a vital connection between reader and text. In those blissful moments of embodying a story, we possess the ingenuity to rhetorically imagine togetherness in ways that have felt impossible. So today with my colleague, Dr. Katie Kane, I'm delighted to spend some time together with Anne Enright discussing her latest novel, Actress. Anne is an absolute force in contemporary writing, having published her first book, The Portable Virgin, in 1991. Her debut was followed by the novel, The Wig My Father Wore, and in 2000, Anne released What Are You Like?, a brilliant work centered on the lives of a set of female twins, which was my personal introduction to Anne's writing while I was pursuing a degree in Irish studies. I have to say my intellectual world was totally rocked. I also must admit that I was delighted to read similar refrains within the pages of Actress within the form of what was she like? What was she really like? 2 years later, Anne released her next book, The Pleasures of Eliza Lynch, which I recall briskly walking to my local bookstore back in Boston to purchase a copy the moment it was available. In 2008, Anne's book, The Gathering, won the Booker Prize. What came next for Anne was the publication of 2 more novels, The Forgotten Walls and The Green Road. Anne's breadth across genres is evident in her publication of a book of nonfiction called Making Babies and 2 collections of short stories, Taking Pictures and Yesterday's Weather. In 2015, Anne was announced as the inaugural laureate of Irish fiction. Anne lives and writes in Dublin, but today we welcome her to Montana. So let us turn now to Actress, which tells the story of Catherine O'Dell, a famous Irish star of stage and screen, as told by her daughter, Nora. The novel is constantly at motion, at once weaving and unraveling the stories of mother and daughter, performance and reality. Throughout the text, the fabric of Catherine and Nora's lived experiences emerges at times tattered and frayed, a textile, a life that is losing form and function, while also being sharply punctuated with triumphant moments of tenderness, an impenetrable weave that forever bonds mother and daughter, regardless of what may come. At its most invitational moments, Actress embraces readers with intimate details of fame and family, all the while maintaining the allure and incandescence of a life devoted to performance. So as Lauren mentioned, for today's panel, we are thrilled to have Anne read from Actress, and then Katie and I will offer some responses and open it up for discussion. So it's with great pleasure, Anne, I'd love to turn it over to you to read to a little bit from Actress.
Thanks, Erin. It's lovely to be so warmly read and to meet you after so many books. Yes, it starts with "What do you like?" which is a great Irish phrase. Like, what do you like? Meaning, God, you know, get over yourself, or you know, any style of sort of convenient, friendly interlocution. What do you like? Anyway, it's a great question. It's a question about identity. It's a question about how we describe ourselves, to the world. Anyway, this is a daughter about her mother, Actress. People ask me, what was she like? And I try to figure out if they mean as a normal person, what was she like in her slippers, eating toast and marmalade? Or what was she like as a mother? Or what was she like as an actress? We did not use the word star. Mostly, though, they mean, what was she like before she went crazy? As though their own mother might turn overnight, or they might, like a bottle of milk left out of the fridge, or they might themselves be secretly askew. Something happens as they talk to me. I'm used to it now. It works in them slowly, a growing wonder, as though recognizing an old flame after many years. You have her eyes, they say. People loved her. Strangers, I mean, I saw them looking at her and nodding, though they failed to hear a single word she said. Well, yes, I have her eyes. At least I have the same color eyes as my mother. A hazel that in her case people like to call green. Indeed, whole paragraphs were penned about bog and field when journalists looked into my mother's eyes. And we have the same way of blinking, slow and fond, as though thinking of something very beautiful. I know this because she taught me how to do it. Think about cherry blossom, she said, drifting on the wind. And sometimes I do. Such were the gifts I got from Catherine Odell, star of stage and screen. How are you, oh mother of mine? Never better, she used to say, and the blossoms drifted by the tree load when she looked at me. There was a man in the kitchen in Dartmouth Square, where everything important in my life seems to have happened, who knew someone who had slept with Marilyn and never washed, he said. Some evening in my childhood, I came down the stairs to hear this news, and he was such a nice old man. It's stained me ever since. So when people ask, what was she like? I have an urge to say, pretty clean, actually. And then to add, I mean, by the standards of the day. So there's Catherine, the famous mother, and the young daughter trying to explain in her grown-up mode what she was like. Is that enough? Have you got questions?
Yeah,
I'm sure you do.
wanna...
It's just a little, an amuse-bouche. It's just a little intro there. Nora is writing, or attempting to write, and possibly failing to write, a memoir of her mother's life. She's provoked into doing this by a student rocking up at her doorstep and saying, basically, what was she like, but also saying, I want to write about her through the prism of sexuality. You know, what was her sexual style, says the student, who has herself quite a complicated sexual style. And Nora, the daughter, kind of thinks that the student's sexual style has very little to do with her mother in the 1950s and 1960s. And she reclaims her. She basically says, no, I'll write this book. Thank you very much. And starts into it at the behest of her husband, who's fed up listening to her. talking about the book that she hasn't written. And she starts into writing a book about her mother and details all the kind of things that a memoir would detail. And it's a real genuine attempt to describe a life in a way that it might conventionally be described by an outsider. But of course, she doesn't kind of keep that up for long. She starts describing herself because it's as much about the relationship between them as it is about anything. And then gradually, I suppose, she starts to take over the book a little. So although she promises us the figure of her legendary flame-haired Irish mother, I love your background there, Katie. I don't know if people have seen it yet, but bog and field, she doesn't quite hand over that person to the reader. There's a game of possession and description that goes through the book, which some readers find very frustrating and get quite cross about. And some people kind of get it, which I don't mind either way.
All right. Should I go, Lauren? Where did Lauren go?
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
Okay, all right. So mine is a response, performative, sort of analytic. It might be a little bit too long. I have a reputation for going on too long. So we'll see how this goes here. Just like Erin, I want to say I'm happy to be here today with all of you. I'm particularly grateful to be in the presence of Erin, my partner in all kinds of academic resistance and creativity, particularly in the context of Irish studies at the University of Montana. I'm happy to be here with the beautiful, the intelligent, the organizer, Lauren Korn. And of course, I'm happy to be here with you, Anne, a woman among women, a writer among writers in contemporary Irish letters, or for that matter, Irish letters as they stretch away back across the years. And I'm happy in a kind of Norma Desmond way to be here with all you wonderful people out there in the land of Zoom, which is currently dark. So Enright's book, indeed her corpus of work, explores the performance of family in Ireland, and to some degree, the performance of family in the diaspora, a small aspect, let us say, of Catherine Odell's work involves performing Irishness in the Irish-American circuit on the East Coast after her star dims in Hollywood, a process of a misogynistic killing of both the celluloid body of the actress and of a human being. Here is a passage that goes exactly to the performance of one form of Irishness demanded by the especially American diaspora that I think the book details very well. It's on page 146, 147, and I just want to read, I'll probably be reading a few passages from the book. This is Catherine returning home after not having called her daughter as she should have, or as she thinks she should have. In any case, we forgave each other and walked back to the stairs with our arms entwined, both in our sateen dressing gowns, she in lilac, me in powder blue. She hauled herself up by the banister rail saying, "I'm sorry I didn't get home last week, had to stay for the parade." She was on a float going down Fifth Avenue for St. Patrick's Day, pretending to play an enormous golden harp. I love that passage. Of actress, there is much to say, but I'll confine myself to the discussion of the acute and beautiful analysis or examination the book provides of the ways in which mother and daughter roles are performed, always performed via prescribed, already written social scripts and through improvisation. I have to say that for all my reading of Judith Butler, of Jack Halberstam, and even Julia Kristeva, I had not had the veil ripped away from my eyes in quite the same way that this book tore the call from me regarding how performative my own mother was in her role as a mother, and I in response as daughter. I find, therefore, Actress to be a novel of great aesthetic value, but today, in this post-reading moment, to be useful as a philosophical or psychoanalytic treatise of the way in which scripts and scenes are thrust upon or taken up by mothers and daughters. In thinking about this particular performativity that Enright's book discloses, I am put in mind of the great Irish scholar Benedict Anderson's book on nationalism, Imagined Communities, in which he discusses the ways in which nation states imagine themselves into existence out of stories and not facts. Communities are to be distinguished, Anderson says, not by their falsity or genuineness, but by the style in which they are imagined. The delight and sorrow of Enright's book lies in understanding the ways in which Catherine Odell and Nora Fitzmaurice imagine themselves both alone and in connection with each other. And I want to read something from early in the text, page 9, that I think gets at the kind of performativity that trammels around their relationship. So she's been, Catherine Odell's been singing a birthday song. And Nora says, "You must know that by this time she rarely sang and certainly never on stage. I'm too old," she said, remembering perhaps some unrepeatable perfection that brought the house to its feet in London or New York or Dublin town. But my goodness, my mother had a voice that arrived from everywhere. It slipped out of her mouth, then came back to her from the far corner. Catherine Odell did not sing so much as she pulled the song out of the walls. She called it into being, and the air was charged with sound. After which, don't blow them out yet, we leaned in for the photograph, an official snapper brought by the social diarist from the evening press. Mama gave the lens her back and a 3/4 profile. It was all staged. There is no doubt the cake was timed, the walk, the snap. I know that. And I also know my mother sang that night for me alone. What Enright does in Actress is to chart the ways in which a particular mother and daughter imagine themselves under the constraints of time, space, and circumstance. That Catherine Odell is part fact and part fiction is of no matter, since so are we all. Again, this is one of the great insights of the novel. What style have we chosen? What style will we choose? I said to Lauren in asking how I might respond to the novel that I might be performative. And here now I will be in telling you a brief story of my own Irish American non-professional actress mother, Jane Frances Kane, to whose second act performance of the maternal I greatly objected, but from whose first act I will tell a small anecdote. My mother was an O'Sullivan and a Marshall, and for the purposes of this talk, I'll leave out the McDonald. And she married a cane burn man, and all her life she has seen herself as Irish to an irritating degree. Spending, for example, in her dotage, quite literally hundreds of dollars on St. Patrick's Day tchotchkes to arrive somewhere during that day at my house with soda bread, to be decked and bedizened with all kinds of green stuff, and complaining about my lack of performative participation in a holiday that I loathe. But aren't you Irish, she would say? And excuse me if I use the word Irish when what I mean, what we all mean in America, is Irish American. It is confusing shorthand for the ethnic subject position in America to call ourselves Irish. And I will point out here that the assembled tchotchkes will soon be mine, inherited in their boxes. For my mother was nothing if not obsessive in her quest to perform the role, visiting every single store in Missoula that sold the green on the days prior to March 17th, culling all of the material that she wanted. My mother was like Catherine Odell, a great and beautiful Irish American disaster. But that is her performance of a kind of stage Irishness for Americans. I want to talk briefly of the ways in which my mother imagined herself as an actress of the domestic in a way that was reflective of her sense of Irishness, an insight that I've really only come to after reading Enright's novel. I want to read a passage about invention from Actress before telling this story. This section from the text reveals the way in which memory of childhood and maternal invention is both faulty and natural in ways that are not to be indicted, but that are to be observed and understood. This is a passage that comes after Nora is lost and brought home by a strange man. And the passage is on page 36. Never speak to a strange man, says Catherine. Do you hear me? Never, ever. And it was so hard to tell if this was a story about a bad man or a bad little girl. I don't know how many times I heard it before the penny dropped. They didn't say that. She looks at me. I must have been a teenager by then, the doubting stage. They didn't have Irish accents. She thinks about it a moment. There's a small flash, perhaps of anger. She is shocked at herself, the way you are shocked when your memory goes, oh my God, that's true. They spoke in London accents. She has rewritten her childhood and lost the first draft. My mother, who was not the Irish American mother that my paternal grandmother, Pearl Byrne Kane, was, with her breads and her patience and her somewhat perverse relationship to the Catholic Church and her two daughters in holy order, my mother was nevertheless herself in love with the vision, the imaginary of the large and loving Irish American family, itself a terrible beauty. When my father died at the age of 36, leaving her with 6 children, all of them Irish twins, she told me that her single thought when he died was this: there goes my dream of having 13 children. Since she was telling me this in the midst of the post-paternal period, and let it be noted that my father was a good man, worthy of mourning well beyond his ability to produce progeny, since she was telling me this in the post-paternal period in which we all 6 were being placed into foster homes, as my mother woke up from her dream of Irish American domesticity with its Jackie Kennedy veneer and its deep roots in Ireland, since she was telling me this at just that moment, my only thought was, well, thank God that didn't happen. The story of my mother's own career as an actress of domesticity has itself 1,000 mothers, but one of the most important is the version of Mother Ireland on tap in Actress. The transformation of Catherine O'Dell into an Irish actress, into a version of Kathleen Nahulahan, a style she plays. So I see Mother Ireland as being everywhere in this book, and I'm just going to read briefly from 82, and I think this will be the last reading I'll do, but let me turn to 82. Where is it? 82. So this is Catherine O'Dell's transformation in Hollywood into a kind of, version of Mother Ireland. They went to Sardi's on opening night. This is she and Eddie Malk, her agent, and stayed up for the reviews, which were only moderately good. The one in the Tribune contained a typo, an extra apostrophe in Catherine's name, rendering her O'Dell, and this made her laugh. I quite like it, she said to Eddie, wrapping an imaginary shawl about her and throwing her head back to declare, I've lost him, surely the only playboy of the Western world. The next day he was in her hotel room, going through her wardrobe, rifling through the hangers, throwing the outfits on one chair or another. My mother, her quilt about her chin, sat watching him from the bed. From now on, he said, you wear any color you like, so long as it is green. By this he meant anything from teal to emerald, all 40 shades of it. The hotel hairdresser arrived, pulled my mother's head gently back into the sink, and 2 hours later, she was a flaming redhead. Auburn, said Eddie. The book plays with and pushes against and ultimately reclaims the figure of Mother Ireland, a thing that is a great gift. I thought while reading Enright's novel of Anne Crilly's 1990s era documentary on Mother Ireland, where feminists like Bernadette Devlin McAlliskey and Mairead Farrell and the rest respond to the performative imperatives of Mother Ireland, some saying that she didn't represent them. Mother Ireland, get off my back, or that she did. She was a country understood in a particular style that involved acknowledging colonialism. Enright's novel moves beyond the binary of bad and good Mother Ireland and into an exploration of a necessary and sometimes coerced performance, which is open, as performance always is, to revision, to rehearsal, to restaging. And in closing, I want to say that perhaps the most valuable aspect of this reimagining of Mother Ireland involves the acknowledgement of aging, dropping the tray with the pantyhose down. I was always thinking while reading Actress of that great Irish performance given across the centuries by the Cailleach Beara, the Hag of Beara. Some of you might have recognized the image I have behind me on Zoom. It is a large rock situated in Bay in County Cork, which is believed to represent the Cailleach's face. I was lucky enough to see this once upon a time. Representing her face turned to stone as she stared out to sea, waiting in vain for her husband, Manon McAleer, to return. I'll stop now with a reading from some lines from Augusta Gregory's translation of the Irish poem about the Cailleach. I am the hag of Bara. Amen, woe to me. Every acorn has to drop after feasting by shining candles, to be in the gloom of a prayer. I had my day with kings, drinking mead and wine. Today I drink whey water among shriveled old hags. Actress has made me glad to drink the whey water among old hags, shriveled or not, and grateful to be away from the boys, the days with kings drinking their poisoning mead and wine. Thank you, Anne, for a fabulous and thought-provoking novel and for reading for us here today. I think Erin and I have some questions for you. Erin, do you want to go first since I've actually
have a response too, Katie.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's okay. So we actually, Katie and I didn't share, obviously, as with that, but we didn't share. We have similar passages that we gravitated towards. So I love when people read on their own and then come together. So for my part, I'll offer some insight on themes from Actress that deeply moved me. Some helped discern answers to global questions about mothers and daughters, while others transported me to more local contexts, such as the sacred role of women and mothers in Ireland, as defined by Article 41.2 of the Constitution, that is often referred to as the Mother and Baby Clause. The wording of Article 41.2 states, quote, by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved, end quote. It's further stated that because of this primary function as homemakers, mothers shall, quote, not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labor to the neglect of their duties in the home, end quote. In 1937, Eamon de Valera avowed that, quote, everyone knows there's little chance of having a home if there's no woman in it. The woman really is the homemaker, end quote. This architectural framework of domesticity presents itself in Actress as a persistent reminder to both women of how they violate such norms. Perhaps this is to their delight or blissful ignorance. Either way, their performances outside the home, in public, on stage or screen, and within the home, where the walls contained madness and love, all demonstrate the interconnectedness of performance and reality. In this way, Catherine and Nora's domestic lives are certainly conventional, or are they? While reading Actress, my pen frantically danced across the pages, annotating and scribbling marginalia. There was something invitational about Nora's explorations and reflections, which led me to a triangulation of sorts. A symbiosis between Nora and Catherine that's rooted in suffocating gender norms, the often subtle but sometimes violent disruptions to these prescribed roles, and the cyclical and intergenerational burdens carried and shared between mothers and daughters. As a reader, I bore witness to the various performances of both women. Sometimes their acting led to deeper concealment, other times excruciating honesty. But across it all, there were always costumes. This makes sense. Catherine O'Dell is an actress. There's something much more deliberate to the various costumes both she and Nora wear. There's a resistance entrenched in their distinct performances of self. Actress circulates around tension points that range from fame to domesticity, public and private personas, and the thorny realities facing women, including misogyny, sexual abuse, age discrimination, and the collision of emotional and intellectual labor as related to the realities of societal expectations of motherhood, daughterhood, and womanhood. A tangled trifecta that persistently accompanies both Catherine and Nora. When distilling the pressures of fame and womanhood, particularly as they relate to performance, my attention was drawn to concepts of beauty and fashion, particularly as they relate to misogyny. A central reason for this coupling is both beauty and fashion are focused on the adornment and alteration of the natural sense of self in the naked human form, a costume or mask, if you will. The prevalence of high heels, corsets, makeup, plastic surgery, and the sexualization of young women feature prominently in conversations on women's status globally, often taking cues from those in the public eye. Many of the influencers are indeed themselves actresses, also tasked with playing a role. Evidence of misogyny in beauty and fashion encompasses elements of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, able-bodiedness, as well as social and cultural factors. Misogynistic messages are splashed across popular television programs, covers of prominent magazines, and on social media feeds or in storefronts across the world. This trend represents a dangerous precedent regarding mainstream acceptance of damaging cultural norms targeted at women and girls. This is perhaps no more evident than with the career of Catherine Odell and the intergenerational impacts of the misogyny she endured and how the aftershocks of this abuse manifest in Nora's own life. The origin of the word fashion and beauty are illuminating when examined in conjunction with misogyny and costuming. Stemming from the Latin word bellus, which translates to good, physical beauty is often connected to a sense of enlightened goodness. Such energy is also present in the phrasing of Article 41.2, where women are heralded as the irreplaceable core of the family unit. The word fashion has roots in two Latin words, facere and factio, both meaning to do or to make. In Old French, the word facon was used to denote a way or manner. In Middle English, fashion emerged similar to its use now, to make, shape, or alter appearances. Most telling in this evolution is perhaps the way that fashion began as a dynamic and active term, something that is done or made. But when investigating instances of misogyny as related to fashion or costuming, the term devolves into something static, a personification of passive voice, and that the action is done to someone. They no longer perform the action themselves. In many ways, Catherine's career follows a similar trajectory. She doesn't actually become Catherine Odell until she undergoes a radical and deliberate transformation into a caricature of an Irish woman. And this is the line, Katie, we shared, quote, "The hotel hairdresser arrived, pulled my mother's head gently back into the sink, and 2 hours later, she was a flaming redhead," end quote. Accordingly, clothes and the associated vernacular reveal much more than a personal sense of style. Terms such as white collar and blue collar denote more than one's trade. They also suggest socioeconomic status and placement on a social hierarchy. Historically, fashion also purported to offer clues about one's sexuality or political beliefs. Flappers were thought to be unconventional. Hippies were seen as anti-war. While many embrace the evolving trends of fashion as an expression of self, there's perhaps an equal distribution of critics who view fashion devotees, particularly women and girls, to be in submission of an industry that takes advantage of them, not dissimilar from the film and theater industries as revealed throughout Catherine's life and career. This abuse is manifest through misogynistic practices such as encouraging notions of unrealistic body image, fetishism, degradation, cultural misappropriation, and sexualization. Clothing designed by the ateliers of Chanel, Dior, and Hermes are gently dropped into descriptions of Catherine's wardrobe, an armor only available to those of considerable means. The dear cost of a simple blazer, enough to cause heart palpitations. Of import, Catherine was astute in her understanding and the power of fashion. When she finds herself in court charged with a serious offense, Nora describes the scene by noting, quote, "My mother wore for the occasion an old-fashioned suit of aqua summer tweed, round collar, metal buttons like plaited rope, probably Chanel. She was dressed for a shooting and for the 6 o'clock news," end quote. In this way, Catherine attempts to flex and manipulate public opinion by playing a role that defies reality and the facts of the case. Catherine's costume choices remain relevant when she is photographed walking in a protest march on the first anniversary of internment without trial, 6 months after Bloody Sunday. She's described as wearing, quote, "a kind of housewife scarf knotted under the chin," though it was actually Hermes. And as she passed the camera lens, she threw her head back and smiled, end quote. In this provocative moment, Catherine embodies the glamour of a star evidenced by the posh quality of her scarf, but masterfully completes the costume by tying the scarf in a manner that projects the wholesomeness of a housewife. While there are instances of Catherine's clothing and costumes working to her advantage, the cut of these garments, the prestige associated with curating a closet of haute couture, elevate Catherine while also exposing her to the penetration of public curiosity. In a panel discussion on Actress, Anne referred to the sensation of being starstruck, something that is first dropped in the opening pages of the novel, honing in on the inherent violence associated with literally being struck, a violence that forever plagues Catherine Odell. But it wasn't always that way. While in America, Catherine Odell became Catherine Odell, best illuminated by this passage, quote, "One of those days she walked down Fifth Avenue with her new hair, her new corset, her new heels, and something happened to the people who passed her by. Heads turned. She was like a pebble dropped into a pool of their attention, and she sank deliciously into it, delighted by the way she could hide now in plain view, because they did not know her at all, and that was the great joke of it," end quote. Catherine also seemed to possess an acute awareness to the roles she was tasked with playing both on and off stage. In a scene where the kitchen is described as the only warm room in the house, where mother and daughter congregate in an entirely non-domestic style, while also sensing that this is where they belong, Catherine's stockings reveal subtle clues about the pressures thrust upon women. Nora recalls, quote, "I think she rolled her tights down. It sounds disgusting, but I think she sometimes sat there with her pantyhose, as she affected to call them, in a glinting beige fog wreathed about her ankles. She could not take them off altogether for some reason. And perhaps a lady never did," end quote. On the next page, the meditation on domestic life, gender roles, and costumes continues with Nora's fears for her mother when she offers, quote, "I was worried about her tripping over her fallen tights as I left her to the last of the wine and went to bed," end quote. The turn of phrase, "tripping over her fallen tights," encapsulates disruption and disarray, the cognitive dissonance of struggling to be oneself when that role is wholly unavailable. In an interview earlier this year with the London Review Bookshop, Anne referenced the difficulty of mothers trying to leave the house. As Catherine's career wanes, it becomes evident she has a harder and harder time leaving the house. In Enright's words, "It wasn't an easy affair." For Catherine, domesticity emerges in reverse order. The bounds of home, as articulated in Article 41.2, were not enough to hold her until later in life, when she begins to lose herself with age and declining mental capacity. And as a mother with an adult daughter, or as an actress with a career that is careening away from stage and screen, this leaves Catherine's identity in flux. In this way, Article 41.2, the woman's role as defined by a nation, not herself, marginalizes the life Catherine has made. She is out of sorts within the trope of the domestic angel. As a disastrous experiment in alchemy, where fame and domesticity struggle to coexist, Catherine's inability to thrive in her home or outside of it reveal the suffocating mask of a domiciliary existence. In many ways, Catherine does act the part. The novel opens with Nora recalling a headline that read, "Catherine Odell at home." The article continues, quote, "Home from her latest triumph on Broadway, Catherine Odell took time this week to talk to our diarist, Terry O'Sullivan, about matters theatrical and domestic. She recently was in receipt of a dishwashing machine, the first in the country, or at least I think it might be," end quote. So while Catherine masterfully eluded the constraints of domestic life behind closed doors, in public she understood the role that she as a Irish woman was expected to embrace, a performance that led to her dramatic unveiling of a dishwasher while also acknowledging she had no idea how to work the thing. And without her consent, Catherine's career was extinguished. Nora reflects, "The truth is that Catherine Odell was, at 45, finished, professionally, sexually. In those days, when a woman hit 30, she went home and shut the door," end quote. Yet for Catherine, with her absence of domestic prowess, there was nothing behind her home's door. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Katie or Anne, or however we want to proceed. I don't know if Katie, you have a question that you want to ask, or Anne, if you want to ask us anything, or.
Well, that was all very intriguing. One thing and wonderful, and thank you both. What a engaged response. There is one thing behind the door, and that is a woman called Kitty.
Kitty,
and very few people pick it up. She has a housekeeper for all of that, and actually the performance of domesticity that she enacts is not unlike that asked of people like Joan Crawford. I mean, one of the things that Joan Crawford's adopted daughter complained about was that she was constantly dragged out for perfect photographs, in which her mother could, you know, have a gingham dress on and have a tablecloth on the grass, and they could have picnics and they could be that thing. So it was not just Article 41.2, whatever you, that wonderful article in the Constitution, which has been completely ignored in ways that other articles of the Constitution have not been ignored in Ireland. I mean, if the woman's role in the home were properly supported, then, for example, one might get paid for it. But nothing like that has ever been mooted in the country. So it's a really redundant piece of, you know, of nonsense. Very odd little thing there in the Constitution.
I have a question to ask about those two characters. So was the use of Catherine and then a diminutive for Catherine attached to, you know, Kitty? So, you know,
yeah.
Was that deliberate? Because it's almost as though there's some kind of weird splitting, or, you know, I don't know, of the characters into.
Well, there is. I mean, as with all the namings in a book, it's both complex and then quite simple. So I had named her Kitty, and the names went through various iterations. And when I realized that I had that doubling up, I said, well, that's absolutely fine. Kitty is one of those women and who really existed in my youth and childhood, who would duck down as they crossed a room so that nobody would notice them. They're utterly and completely given over to the domestic service of other households or of their own household sometimes.
Yeah,
just astonishingly servile.
Yeah.
And I met them, and they such existed in the Ireland of my childhood anyway. Wow. So that was Kitty, and without Kitty, I mean Kitty, poor Kitty. She's a key then to how the book progresses and how history is held, because it's her grandnephew who has some of the documents that are used in the end of the book. Kitty is a secret key to the book.
Yeah.
I couldn't call Catherine Kathleen.
Yeah.
Kathleen is always there. I had a book called The Green Road, and I was going to call her Kathleen, but I ended up at Rosaline, and you Irish scholars will know Kathleen O'Houlihan and my dark Rosaline. Catherine is a much more kind of neutral name.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway,
did you want to ask us anything
that's performed? I'm a bit gobsmacked, actually. To be honest, I have to absorb all of this stuff about, first of all, well, costume and Irishness. These two things ring great bells. I want to point out that all of Catherine's costumes are possibly Dior, probably Chanel, and definitely Hermes. So even the costuming is not finished, you know. She may also be imitating somebody who's wearing Dior as much as wearing Dior. So yeah, all of those costumes are qualified throughout the book. And the tights, just as a matter of anecdote, the pantyhose were a cause. I had some readers who were as old as Nora is. She's about 10 years older than me. And one of them queried that she should have been wearing stockings. And there was an absolute a bit of research there for me between pantyhose and stockings. She brought those back from America because joined up tights, as they were invented in America at a very particular time and did not exist. She should have been wearing stockings. So she affected to call them pantyhose. These things get really, really, really tiny. I'm not all, you know, I interviewed Margaret Atwood once, and she got bored in the middle of it and started talking about burly corsets and ads for underwear. I was completely lost. It's not an area of interest to someone of my generation, to the extent that it would have been for Catherine, but perhaps the next book I'll have everybody in interesting lingerie. Anyway.
And
Yeah.
Would you be willing to talk a little bit about, in your own words, the dodgy priest?
Oh, yeah. I've never had a priest before. I've avoided priests. I've had priest-like characters. There's a character in The Green Road called Emmett, and he was saving poor people in Africa. And he was priest-like, although he wasn't celibate. And then there was a kind of aura of Catholicism gone off in The Gathering, which I wrote in 2007, but I published. I had a very deliberate idea that I wouldn't bring the Catholic Church into it, because for me, as a writer, I mean, you're going into people's lives in a very kind of primary way. I'm not ideological as I write. I'm imagining things. I'm not lecturing in any way. But the Catholic Church, for me, as an urban person born in 1962, didn't have the personal, spiritual, or intellectual power that would provoke me into a fight. I just thought that fighting with the church was a redundant enough thing to do.
Yeah.
There's a personal, there's a personal choice. I didn't think the church would either, and also I'm quite, I think of blasphemy, for example, as being somehow intellectually silly. You're not going to get in under people's beliefs, which are so hugely personal and quite fierce sometimes. And I think that's a whole other thing. Which is given out about Catholicism wasn't my bag. However, there is a priest in this, which is perhaps a sign that the Catholic Church's power has waned to a degree where I can have fun with the figure of a priest.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can actually sort of not make them a joke, that wasn't it either, but move them around in some interesting way. So yeah, there's Father Des, isn't there? Who he's a Jesuit, and he leaves for a while. Jesuits are always very interesting, and he left to study under Lacan and came back and became a psychoanalyst in Dublin. And there was a queue out the door, of course, because he was the only psychoanalyst in Ireland who could give you absolution. So that was fun. So yes, he's loving. He's loving in a slightly spooky way that makes people feel like they don't exist. Nora says as a child that when he smiled at her, she felt like a potted plant. That generally benign thing. And I won't give it.
I love that you called him a tame priest. I think that gets at all that you're saying.
Yeah, well, there were show business priests as well. I mean, there was an actors' church in Manhattan, there still is, and there always were connections between the spiritual needs of a community that was seen to be outside the respectable norms. And those spiritual needs would be met in one or other way by, particular priests. I mean, you're talking about in Ireland, people couldn't get communion if they were in non-married relationships, all kinds of. So you needed a tame priest. There had to be a kind of safety valve. There had to be some guy who would baptize an illegitimate child, for example. I mean, the church needed these little escape rooms as much as I had written at length about that and cut it back because it just sort of ran away with itself. It was for the women particularly who found the loss of respectability so hard to take. I think the line has stayed in the book where the problem was they went off with a man who was too interesting for his own good.
Yes.
And then there was no wedding and it was all awful. So yeah, he was just a little space. I mean, the church is a varied place. We don't think of it as such, but it also is.
But he adds to the complexity of I thought of consent a lot as I was reading, but also I was thinking about how repulsed I was by Niall, the fucker, and moments of I was more repulsed by him when you were writing about, and Nora was reflecting not on the moment where she was saying no, the complexity of what that meant, and culturally in that moment what it meant and how she took on some of that burden of consent, but the physical description of him and how much space he took up and the way his skin was and his body hair, and it shifted repulsion and consent into a very different way for me. And I was wondering, did you intend for him to be that repulsive?
Duggan.
Yeah.
Duggan.
Yeah, I probably did. Yeah, there is. Yeah,
For
yeah,
you.
probably. Well, I looked at the rewrites. I mean, they're just tiny, tiny little words in there, in the rewrite that ramped up that sense of disgust. There's a scene where they have sex, and she says, "He didn't kiss me," and then I added in much. And I just thought that much caught so much potential revulsion. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And things like, there are very specific and slightly estranged sensations that are described that are supposed to be have that effect on you. When she goes to the pub with this guy, Duggan the fucker, who there are two episodes, two sexual episodes with him. One in which she's sort of punishing him slightly, and one in which he is punishing her. But they go to a pub in between times, and she hears and it's I really enjoyed this description of a man drinking a pint, that iconic goddamn thing of Irish letters. And you know how he flicks the foam off with his square-tipped finger, and when he drinks, you can hear the liquid in the meat of his neck. I thought that was pretty repulsive, actually. And also that he doesn't swallow until he's like a third of the way down the pint he is, and so he just throws it into him. So all of that, which is usually the stuff of comedy in Ireland and in Irish fiction, and alphalas in pubs are a staple of aren't we kind of awful and kind of great. But when it goes back to his house and his bedroom, then that shifts into another, very deliberately shifts into another kind of space, and a modern space as well.
Yeah. So Katie, for the purpose of time, do you have another question? And then Lauren suggested maybe if Anne, you would read just one more passage.
Okay. I was thinking it's been a while since I've read, so I don't really know what to read anymore.
Oh, Jesus, read anything. It'll be great. I do have other questions, but I think we should have Anne read. Never mind my questions.
I might read just a little bit at the end, which I haven't read. Which is just when she's all finished. She's been looking for a ring of her mother's, and it's an emerald green. She says it's a black emerald. So it's more Irish for you. And Nora can't find the ring, and she's ransacking the house, and she says first she must mourn, but later then she lives in a little town called Bray, south of Dublin. A few days ago, I found a cassette player on the kitchen counter. The thing was huge and grimy. It was made of dark grey plastic with big clunky buttons. And I had to admit, I wasn't happy seeing more rubbish coming into the house. Where did this come from? Then I saw the cassette beside it, Poems at Twilight, as read by Catherine O'Dell. It is one of the tapes I'd found in the little brown case. The machine was a gift. You must have sourced it for me, her husband. You must have sourced it for me somewhere online. And its neat little maw was open, waiting for something to play. I put the rattling cassette in the slot and squeezed the window shut, but I didn't know if I could press the button. I was convinced the tape would stretch and snap as they sometimes used to. I was afraid of what I might hear. My mother's voice. Are you home? There was no reply. I looked at the playlist. Yeats, Pierce, James Clarence Mangan, her photograph on the paper insert, yearning and noble, big hair, an actual cloak with a Celtic pin. It was not her. It could never be her. It was just the wonder of her voice, trapped on a shiny brown ribbon and waiting to be free. There's Mother Ireland for you now, waiting to be free, Katie, okay? I popped the eject so the tape would not start rolling somehow without me. And I left the house, shoving the front door key beneath a rock in the garden. I closed the small front gate and walked down the road towards the prom. I took nothing with me. Even though the weather was on the turn, this is the way I like to walk, with no phone, no keys, no bag, no money. I love the air in my empty pockets and the wind along my back. I would wear no socks, but I have a rule about such things. It's important to be fully dressed when you're out in the world. Not that I would ever forget, but I have a dangerous dream of divesting one piece of clothing after another as I cross the stony beach to meet the waves. This is not a suicide, it is a swim. I must make this much clear. Even so, if you could put a dream into a pill, this is the tablet I would take in my last days. One that as you sucked, released a sense of the sea. We love living in Bray, a small town outside Dublin. It's a Victorian resort with a permanent off-season charm. There are amusement arcades and a bandstand, seagulls looking for dropped ice cream. The seafront attracts off-season people. Those who work odd hours are not at all. And there is something desperate and joyous about us as we walk along the prom, leaning into the wind. I turned south towards Bray Head, a worried-looking hill at the end of the beach that spends much of the day humped over its own shadow. Bray is a morning town facing east. I rarely see the head in full sunshine, and today was no different. The brow of the hill was furrowed, the rocks a velvet brown, as though considering moss. The sea was on my left. The railings that run along the promenade stretched in a line, regular and familiar, for half a mile. It was wild enough. I could see the rain in a slicing haze heading towards the shore, and the water was already choppy. A squall was coming. The waves were busy and blurred over by flying points of spray, under which the water was sometimes jade, sometimes the color of the dark stone on my mother's ring. But exactly. The sea was the color of a black emerald. It held the light so deep in itself. And this fact flooded me with the memory of the days she spent dying, when my mother was so essentially herself, I could not consider turning to leave the room. I realized I was gripping the top of the railing, and this seemed a foolish thing to be doing at my age. It was such a long time ago. Besides, there was no message for me in the color of the waves. Of course not. My mother was not there for me in the coming storm. She had not sent her consolation. But I had, as I turned for home, a great sense of the world's generosity. Even though it was just my own hopefulness in another guise, even though the sea was just the sea, which was quite enough, really. The sea was certainly sufficient. Enough to be getting on with, I thought, as I lifted my face to meet the rain. That's the end of the book. Giving away the story.
Thank you so much.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Lauren?
Hi, I'm back.
Hi.
Yeah, I thank you so much, Anne. You're such a beautiful reader and writer. Erin and Katie, thank you so much for your responses. I don't know, Katie, if you do have questions, feel free to ask them. But if we want Anne to be the closing, I think we can leave it at that.
That was so amazing. I should have said how amazing those two presentations were, both so different. I was really quite taken aback, actually. I haven't really sat and listened to the stuff about myself in considerable. It's like, oh, okay, whatever you say. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, so much. This has been wonderful. And thank you, Erin. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, China. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this was wonderful. You can buy Actress by Anne Enright at www.factandfictionbooks.com. Fact and Fiction is our Festival bookseller this year. You can buy Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. And while you're there, please feel free to donate so we can continue programming like this into the fall for our MBF Plus events. So again, thank you, Anne, so much for being here all the way from Dublin. Erin, Katie, and China, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.